the third working group report, ad hoc specialty recognition and organizational changes. Liam, okay.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. I'm just going to slightly revise. I had to correct a couple of spelling mistakes, and I had great difficulty reading my notes. So I'm just slightly revising. We had a very, very good meeting. Nope. It's slightly different. Perhaps we tried the original. Even the experts have difficulty with this. We had an excellent meeting, which was very, very well attended. Austria, Belgium, the Czech, Finland, Hungary, Italy, Ireland, Malta, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Romania, Spain, and the United Kingdom, a total of 16 delegates. It was quite an interactive meeting. I think we should look at this meeting as a work in progress, and I would certainly, and I think the Presidency would welcome, and the Board would welcome any comments or any input you have in this regard. We have been discussing the organisation and reorganisation of UAMO for many, many years. It's a work in progress. We continuously look at ways in which we can improve what we do. So we kind of looked at the function of UAMO. What are we? What form should we be in to effectively perform our function as best we can? We're essentially a trade union now. However, we've progressed. Trade unions were very popular many, many years ago. They're not quite as popular now, so we perhaps have to redress ourselves in new clothes as opposed to working jackets, as the French would be aware. We represent in excess of 500,000 family doctors, general practitioners. We have significant influence, and we always look at ways increasing that influence. That influence tends to be in respect of what we do for others rather than what we do for ourselves. And sometimes I think we need to look a little bit closer at what we do for ourselves, because the fitter and healthier we are, both mentally, physically and infrastructurally, the better job we can do for our patients. So perhaps sometimes we need to concentrate on our target and concentrate on the output of what we do. From the point of view of form, there are essentially two ways we can do it. We can do it presidentially or secretarially. Inevitably, being general practitioners, somebody will find a way in the middle that we can progress with. And on that regard, I think Marie-Christine has done some research and questionnaires, and I found it interesting that, now don't quote me on this because it was a rough guess, there were 8 votes for secretarial and 12 others. Now, I couldn't quite get what the 12 others were, but if you want to interpret that, you could say 8 for and 12 against, but that's not the way we do it in UAMO. We will ponder this, and we need to come up with a solution. From the discussion we had, and again, I'm just giving you an outline, not the detail, from a function point of view, the consensus was that the terms and conditions in which we work are the foundation of what we should do. And there was also a strong feeling that we should have a strong and solid foundation, but it should not necessarily be visible to everybody. And we need to represent our members, especially with regard to regulation. And this is why we need a strong input and a strong influence where the regulation comes from. Because it's usually at the formulation of the regulation that we need to be involved, not when the train has actually left the station. And this is consistent with our mission statement, which is quite robust, and it's there on the website for everybody to see. We probably need, again, with regard to the format, or the format in which we do this, we need to get down to the hard scope and costs and options and progress this. And it's a matter for the presidency to pull all this together and present fairly hard options as to which way we should go. It's financial, it's functional, it's form, but time goes on, the clock doesn't stop ticking. Looking at other of our functions, we have patient advocacy and advocacy on behalf of our health service. Sometimes we concentrate more on other people than we do on ourselves, and I'm not saying we should not do that. I'm simply saying we should do both. A strong and vibrant general practice can obviously do a better job. The more tools we have and the better working environment will increase our output. With regards to advocacy on behalf of our members, I think most of you will be familiar. You see this happening every day. We are failing to attract new members into general practice family medicine. We have difficult working conditions. We are operating in what some would describe as an increasingly hostile environment. Job satisfaction it's good, surprisingly, but not probably what it should be. We have to look at what we do and what the next generation and the generation after that do. And there's a tendency towards portfolio work, that we are not defined by a job, we are defined by a number of different things that we do. Work-life balance would be a good thing if we could actually find out what it was and work towards it. And then succession planning is quite difficult in many countries, and I've spoken to many of our colleagues here, and they all wonder that when they retire, which they inevitably will do, what is going to happen to their patients. And I found it very, very interesting that a number of our younger members contributed that continuity of care was very, very high on their list of the importance of our speciality. And it can be quite difficult to balance everything together. I'll leave that to people who are better at balancing things than I am. From a historical point of view, as a speciality, we're quite young, which is not necessarily a bad thing. The union was formed, I think, in the mid-late 60s, and I stand to correction there. The Alma Ata Declaration, everybody is aware of where Alma Ata is if they can't actually quote the declaration word by word or verbatim to it. Specialist recognition. In Ireland, we were recognised in 1988 as a speciality, and that was in or around the beginning of the recognition of general practice as a speciality. And since then, we've achieved much, but we have more to achieve. And I think that has to be one of the pillars of UAMO, as well as I say, continuity. We are hyper-regulation. I don't have to tell anybody here about hyper-regulation. Every time we look around, there's some other quango or organisation which is either unpronounceable or unforgettable, depending on which approach you take, presenting new regulations and trying to make us better. I sometimes think that we don't need a lot of other people trying to make us better. Patient expectation is certainly not declining. If anything, it's fueled, obviously, by a number of different areas. The resource is scarce. We have to fight for our resources. You just have to look at the infrastructure in most countries. It's not what it should be, and we have to fight for every bit of it. And infrastructure is you have to continuously fuel infrastructure, otherwise it starts to decay. There essentially is two models in general practice. traditionally, most of us would come through the small business model, where we run a small or medium enterprise. And there is a movement away from this model that we have to reflect upon, because it's quite definite. And I think we should always look at other professions have evolved quite successfully. We seem to have barriers to progression in this regard. I'm not too sure why. I'm not too sure whether we should reflect upon it. We have the legal profession, we have solicitors, we have the dental profession. They seem to evolve business models that progress with their progression. I'm not too sure we are as good at doing it as they have been. And then we have medicine as a social service, and one of the areas that's coming into our country, I know it's come into other countries unsuccessfully, is the corporate model, the corporatization of general practice. And I think one of the mistakes we made in Ireland is that we told each other that no, doctors certainly weren't going to corporatize general practice, but that certainly didn't prevent other businesses and other business people coming in and corporatizing us. But they are quite insightful insofar as that's what a lot of the younger doctors want. They don't necessarily want to run a small business, and they don't certainly want to run a medium or a large business. They're happy to be employees, to have employee status. Now, employee status within the corporate model rather than employee status in the state model, which is a civil servant. I don't know how many of the members here, the GPs, work as civil servants or direct employees of the state. It's not something I personally would embrace, but I'm sure there are many people who would consider it an excellent option. The expectations that are coming down the road, there is now an expectation from what we do for a perfect outcome. It's an expectation that is quite difficult, and we recently went through a difficult period with screening, cervical screening, and a lot of court cases in the legal profession got involved. And the court ruling was that whoever reads the actual slide or the smear should be able to give an opinion in absolute confidence on that slide. And whereas that may be a grist to the mill from the legal profession's point of view, it has the adverse effect of doctors looking at screening. And unfortunately, many of our politicians, they got confused between screening tests and diagnostic tests. And it was very, very difficult once they got adversarial within their own political domain to actually pull that back. So now many of our colleagues are looking at the screening processes we do and the screening schemes we have, which are highly valuable. And they're saying that, this absolute thing doesn't exist in real life. It simply only exists in the legal life. So we would all have concerns about that. Another question, of course, is that many of us started out doing emergency work. We were there and we provided emergency services. Now, as we have paramedics and we have all sorts of other emergency services, I think it's something that's happening less and less. But there are some doctors who consider themselves to be providing emergency services, particularly in rural communities. And then you have a continuous versus continuity. Continuity of care, as I said before, is one of the pillars of general practice. It's not continuous care, it's continuity. And I think sometimes the politicians and our patients sometimes get that a little bit confused. Task shifting, I really don't have to talk about task shifting. It's every day of the week. The common phrase is, go to your GP, he'll sort or she will sort everything out. It's not a problem. Adverse events, yes, they happen. It's part of what we do that we have adverse events. We have situations which do not turn out. The outcome is not what we wish for or expect, but they happen. And in medicine, it appears to be inquisitional as opposed to inquisitorial. We tend to look for somebody to blame rather than find out what has happened and what are we going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And again, I'll briefly mention infrastructure. Our infrastructure has not been progressed, certainly for 10 years. We went through a difficult period, as many of you know, when the Celtic Tiger got severely ill, and we're just slowly bringing the Celtic Tiger back to life. But it's been a long and arduous route. But the infrastructure has not been addressed during a 10, 15-year period, and you have to feed infrastructure. The expectations, I find it interesting, the service has a number of expectations, and I'm sure you could all add to that list. As family doctors, we have very few expectations. We would like a little bit of respect from the public, or if not the public, certainly from our patients. And when we do get that, and certainly from our colleagues, I find an increasing trend, certainly from hospital doctors, to have a less than collegiate view of what we do. And it's something that we should address. And I think it's something that is in some way, they didn't naturally acquire this ability. I think it's something that they take from probably their senior colleagues. We would like a life, everybody would like a life. And I think we should certainly deserve it. Whether we have the ability or the desire to actually achieve one, I think is an important question that we all have to ask ourselves. Not a life, not just from our own point of view, but from that of our family and of our friends. And of course, we would appreciate the terms and conditions that would give us some of our expectation. So this is our proposal, that we pull together a plan, we pull together a strategy as UAMO, taking on board that UAMO represents all the national medical organisations. So we need to pull together something that the majority, because you'll never get an absolute majority, that the majority of the NMAs will buy into. And then we need a strategy to implement that plan. Our suggestions that this plan should include, keeping it rather simple, a statement that members of UAMO are committed to provide and deliver quality and sustainable family medicine service to our patients, provided we are given the resources and the conditions to do so. A recognition that there is an emerging manpower crisis in family medicine. A recognition of the specialised nature of general practice family medicine. I think that's one of our pillars. And I would suggest, and I would look for suggestions, certainly and input from the floor, that the presidency should consider putting together a specific task group to achieve these objectives. I'll leave you with the last slide for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. Discussions regarding this topic? Opinions, suggestions? Yes, please.
We was 17 members in the group. Sweden is missing on the list.
Only in version 1, it will be in version 2.
Other observation? Yes, Ivar.
This is important. It's a beautiful job with what done here.
Care.
Thank you. Now I shall just add a little bit about the bit that I was responsible for. I remind the Assembly that at the end of last Assembly, we had issued a meeting with Brexit, and Marie-Christine had included this in the policy advisor, had included this in the press release that UAMO had issued, saying that Brexit looming on the horizon. The General Assembly dedicated time to discussing the consequences of healthcare with a particular focus on patient safety. How to mitigate the possible crisis scenarios such as lack of availability of medicines, medical care across the Irish border, cross-border care after Brexit, recognition of qualifications, training and research on some of the major precedent matters that required then an urgent solution. After 6 months, apparently the situation is not any clearer. In fact, it's a bit more complicated and more confused, I feel, than it was then. But I still feel that we ought to present again another statement similar to this one, emphasizing the enormous difficulty that patients across both borders, professionals across both borders, and the general practitioners or medical practitioners across borders will face with the exit of the United Kingdom from the Union, or even as what seems to be a popular issue or an issue gaining popularity now is a crash exit without any agreement, which would leave everybody in limbo and in the dark. So I think that our Assembly should again reiterate with Michel Barnier from the European Union to ensure that if and when a Brexit happens, all measures have to be taken that there will be no adverse effects on patient health and patient care across borders in the United Kingdom and Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and on Northern Ireland, that there will be no difficulty in the availability of medicines, no obstacles to medical care across the Irish border, and the mutual recognition of qualifications between the between the UK and the rest of Europe. Training, if I had to put in a personal note, training in the UK in Malta is popular because of the lack of language barrier, and the possibility of training in the UK becomes even more difficult now if the UK issues or exits from the European Union, because perhaps the qualifications acquired in the first degrees in Malta would not be accepted like other degrees would not be accepted from other member states. So this issue, I think, has to be made clear, or at least UEMO should issue a statement emphasizing that clarity has to follow exit if ever happens. Other issues were then discussed, but they were incorporated in Lyon's delivery. Thank you.